connected.
Okay. Okay, I think we are live. So, hey everyone, this is Vedant and Orko. We will be your host and co-host for this session. So, title for this session is Team Resilience Score, a mechanism to encourage teams' preparedness to avoid failures. So, this presentation will be given by Sudeepa Prakash. So, I will just giving a brief introduction about her. So, she is a senior technical product manager in the resilience engineering team at Prime Video. She's also a passionate advocate of adopting DevOps strategies to improve development velocity. As a firm believer in building for value, all the products that she has helped create and launched have been centered around values for customers. She's currently focused on enabling Prime Video teams to improve their velocity and by leading multiple efforts to build tools that automate and measure key DevOps mechanism. So, before moving further, in case you have any questions, the audience can put their questions in the session chat, and there will be a select that created for Q&A. In case there are some other questions that are you want to put up again, then we can also put them onto the select chat. It will be available, and yeah, I think yeah. So Deepa, the stage is yours. You can start.
Thank you, Vedant, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to this talk that Vedant said was about the Team Resilience Score. To give you a quick introduction, first, before even I start with the introduction, I want to say thank you to the Chaos Carnival team and Prime Video for giving me this opportunity. And as Vedant was saying, I am passionate about all things DevOps. I've had various roles managing or marketing DevOps related tools and products over the last 6 years. And I've been in the developer productivity space for even longer than that. Started with my role at MathWorks with their code generation tools, followed by products that I marketed, such as JRebel and XRebel by a company called Zero Turnaround. During my time in Amazon, I owned the Amazon Builders Library, which is a collection of articles written by principal, senior principal, and distinguished engineers of Amazon, where we have a collection of articles that talks about how Amazon builds and operates software. Currently, I'm a senior product manager on the Prime Video Resilience and Chaos Engineering team. And my team here is responsible for supporting developer productivity overall across Prime Video teams. We also have data science expertise for forecasting and workload modeling. We drive operational readiness, which is a whole lot of what this talk is centered around. And also, we do a lot of tools for incident recovery. To give you a very brief introduction, the Team Resilience Score is a mechanism that we built to drive operational readiness. Before we get into the details of the score, let's talk about the necessity of a score, right? But even before that, I'd like to run a quick short poll to understand from you, the audience, that what is your reaction when you hear about either product managers coming up with a score, leaders coming up with a score, or a team coming up with a score? Let's just take 30 seconds to look at the poll and what your reaction, what your gut reaction is when you hear about someone's going to put out a score to evaluate you? Vedant, if you don't mind, if you can please fire off the poll, that'll be great. So, what is your reaction when you hear someone in the central team, like a CCOE team, has established a score? Does it remind you of school report cards, and so you don't want anyone grading you? Or is that, are you used to scores in your organization and you understand how it might help you? Let's give it about another 30 seconds to get the answers, and then we'll close the poll and see what you all think. All right, let's close the poll and see what the answers are. Arko, do we have answers yet for, let me see here.
Yeah, so we have 73% people voting for the second option and 26 for the first.
Got it. Got it. Thank you so much. So you said 76 and 34, right?
Yeah, 73% second option, 26 for the first one.
That is awesome. That is good to know. And if that is the case, you're actually going to appreciate this talk much more. But you know what when I started to create the score, given my background, I think one thing that I was very nervous about is if most people are going to look at it as the first option, which is they don't want grading, and what are we going to do? How do I really help them understand it? But I'm so glad to see that this group understands the importance of scores. So this talk, I'm sure you're going to appreciate. But given the skepticism I had myself, I'm going to show you how I sort of overcame that skepticism and sort of came up with a process to make our teams understand like why we need the score and how we came up with the methodology to come up with the score. So having said that, why do you need scores, right? So us, you and I, and all of us live in this world where software systems are getting increasingly complex. We've all in some way or the other moved away from monoliths and into distributed system architectures, right? So while distributed architectures give teams immense control, ownership, and autonomy, they do introduce certain level of complexity with interdependencies. We are largely API-based systems, which are typically operated across multiple geographies and built by multiple cross-functional teams. We all have thousands, if not millions, of users. And for Prime Video, like products, we have the added complexity where we have live events, right? So what I've tried to show here is the complexity, scale, and impact. The picture you see here, which looks like a starry night in a dark sky, is actually a live snapshot of all the services we have that are interconnected. So if you zoom in, each one of those nodes is a service. So how do you manage this kind of complexity, scale, and impact that you want to have, right? It's a balancing act. For this, we need multiple levers. And one such lever at DevOps, at Prime Video is DevOps. And what does DevOps mean to us at Prime Video? It is the process of continuous learning, right? And so many folks have come to me and asked me, like, what is DevOps, by the way? In my mind, DevOps is this process of, it's a journey. And I always say it's a journey. It's not the destination. And in fact, the best definition in my mind for DevOps I came across in this book called Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it, it's a great book. Atomic Habits, as you know, has nothing to do with DevOps, but then they talk about the reality of building habits and why you need habits in the first place. And there was a phrase in that book that caught my eyes, which was, you build habits to relentlessly pursue improvement. And that maps so well to what we think of DevOps in Prime Video. And so DevOps is that relentless pursuit of continuous improvement. And my team, the resilience engineering and chaos team, we support DevOps. We support teams that implement DevOps through a flywheel of predict, prepare, operate, and learn. You will learn more about this flywheel in another talk that's going to be given by my colleagues tomorrow. And if you haven't signed up for that, you should. Olga Hall, Ali Jalali, and Jeff Robinson are going to be talking about this entire flywheel and how we use AI and ML tools in this flywheel. For the purposes of this talk, though, um, when our engineering teams are embracing this DevOps culture and we are supporting them, one of the things we focus on is building tools that provide actionable insights for proactive reliability. But in true Amazon fashion, building the tool is really a means to an end. We start by what the customer problem is. And in this case, it is how do we achieve proactive reliability? Now, this can also be a pretty wide topic. So, to support reliability, we further focus on availability and resilience. Because, like I said, there can be many levers to support DevOps. But for the purposes of this talk, let's focus on availability and resilience. So, within Prime Video, we've made a very conscious choice to sort of anchor ourselves around availability. And this is due to the complexity, scale, and impact that I showed earlier, right? And in order to achieve availability, we will go through a resilience angle. Is this the only way to achieve good availability? Absolutely not. There are multiple levers, but this is one of them, and it's a pretty important one at that. And resilience, in the way it connects to availability, is that when you have higher resilience, you're perhaps going to have better availability. And before we get into the score and everything, I want to define or give you an insight of what resilience means to Prime Video. It's really twofold for us. One is it's preparing to avoid failures, and secondly, it's operating successfully in the presence of failures. So if you get these two right, like you prepare, you do your best to avoid failures, and then in the event, like we all know that, failures are inevitable. So you need to have contingencies and plans to recover from those failures. So to achieve a high availability, our intent is to do this through resilience, right? So higher the availability, better the resilience. I'm sorry, higher the resilience, better the availability. And like I said, I haven't at least figured out a great way of, quantifying beforehand, proactively,
Interrupt you
what
once.
piece.
Your screen is not shared.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me go share my screen again. Do you see it now?
Yeah, and I can see it now.
You can see it now? Cool. All right. So let me. Right. So saying that to have high availability, you need to be better at resilience. So far, we've established an intent that we want to improve resilience and hence availability as we grow and prepare for sort of major releases. How do we then turn this into something tangible, right? So in Amazon, one of the beliefs is that mechanisms are always better than good intentions. So let me walk you through how to convert the intention of wanting to have high availability through resilience into a mechanism. The key aspects of a mechanism is that it's cyclical. We build a tool, we adopt it, and we are able to evaluate constantly, right? So the team resilience score is one such mechanism to encourage teams to prepare to avoid failures. Like I said, resilience itself is twofold, and we don't really have quite a way of proactively quantifying the part where you operate in the presence of failures. But then the score, however, can be used to figure out how ready we are to avoid failures. And I'll show you how we sort of came about creating the score. To create the score, we looked at past issues, right? So when I talked about the ready flywheel too, one of the major components of our flywheel is the fact that we need to learn as we go. So when we look at prior issues, or we can also look at existing engineering practices, and that's sort of fed into what the score's components were, and then finally into a full score. One of the things Amazon is also really great about is recording root cause analysis whenever we have issues. So since we had that data, it was I was really able to recognize some of the patterns that could then convert into meaty components for the score. The score itself that I'm talking about for team resilience to see how prepared we are to avoid failures is fourfold. One is the deployment safety measures. For any good DevOps strategy, you have CI/CD as an integral part of it. So, what are the different tools available from a deployment safety standpoint that you can apply that you know are not going to cause issues? We also do like this operational review or readiness review, where you look at things like security to efficiency to hardware infrastructure to know what that final system or infrastructure is going to look like when you operate your software. Testing, of course, should go without saying, is an important component. And you don't have to limit yourself to unit testing. You can do integration testing. You can, if you have a mature CI/CD workflow. And when you do root cause analysis, there's a component of the score that has root cause analysis as well. So if you're doing some root cause analysis and you have some open action items, you don't want those open action items to be open for a very long time. You want to be able to close out on them. So you get scored accordingly. So based on prior issues, I determined that for us to have these components made sense. And in this case, we weren't introducing anything new to the teams. These were all existing tools that Prime Video teams had handy. So all we were doing is not introducing anything new, but being able to measure where teams are in their resilience process, if you will. So remember the mechanism wheel cycle that I showed you? It actually maps very beautifully to the resilience score too. So the evaluation piece becomes a resilience score. The part where we had the adoption is really the service team's adoption. And the tools that you're giving the team are essentially the components of the score. So the teams can then look at where their score is at, look at what components they need to, focus on in any given year in preparation for a release or anything big that they're planning, or generally to keep their operational health as a really good one. So, what are the goals of this score, right? So, it goes without saying that we want to have something that we are driving with a score. And in this case, like I talked about earlier, it was proactive reliability. Now, proactive reliability can be many, many pieces, but then we decided that we can influence operational excellence through assessing the preparedness to avoid failures. And that's the score. That was the goal of the score. In order to provide actionable insights, we did regular reporting. And this reporting is not necessarily only after the score is available, but in the process of establishing the score too. So you want to democratize this as much as possible, right? You don't want to just like come out and create a score, but then if you democratize it and get the input from the teams, you're going to set yourself up and the score up for better success. And finally, you build the tool. And the tool, one of the biggest things about the tool was to not, in keeping in mind, we wanted to give these actionable insights, but you also wanted to reduce the cognitive load for teams. One of the major things about any engineering team is sort of reducing that repetitive actions that they can do or any place that they can automate, right? So one of the other pillars of DevOps is automation. So any place that you can automate, you should. And that's one of the things we did with building this tool. And I want to show you a few screenshots of the tool itself. So in order to reduce the cognitive load, the graph that I chose was a radar graph. It was just like an easy thing to look at and consume. Right here, I've only mapped the score for 3 services. We can go up to like, I don't know, right now, 200 plus services. And and you can expand it to pretty much how many other services you want. Now, what I can see here is in that lightest gray, which is one of the services, call it XYZ, they're only lacking by a couple of points in the deployment safety area. They get it, they get 100% of the score. In the darker gray, you can see that they could do even more better in the deployment safety area. And in the very dark gray item here, you can see that they're missing two components. The one completely on operational readiness, but then they're doing pretty well on deployment safety and code coverage. So you don't have to have this exact same visualization, but visualization is important because by just looking at this, teams are able to make quick decisions as to what they need to prioritize. And the regular reporting piece, like I said, establish a cadence. What's working for us is to have a weekly report out of where the score is at. Like I said, even before we had a score, we were doing weekly updates for teams to figure out what the score should be. Communication, it's key. It's not just to teams, but also to leaders, because especially when you are having different teams look at, how they want to prioritize, you want to get leaders buy-in. Now, in terms of influencing the operational excellence goals, it is a long journey. Like you can't take one score and subsume the entire operational excellence into it. But it does, having a score for a component sets you on the right track. You can get started. And you getting started is the hardest, right? So start with one score, keep adding to it, move away from scores if it's done its job, and figure out something else, right? So again, just like thinking about DevOps as a journey, operational excellence goal happens to be a journey. What the score is and what isn't, right? What it isn't. The score, in my mind, this kind of score or any other kind of score is literally a mechanism that should help teams. Try to have it hand in hand with a tool so that it's not just a score, but a tool which gives more insights outside of just like what the score is. And then try and remove as much cognitive load as possible with the right visualization. And that's what the score is meant to do. What the score isn't is it's not a report card. It's not a means to mandate processes, and it's not meant only for leaders. It's truly for the teams. So like I said, this was a long process to sort of get here. So I wanted to also share with you some of my key learnings. Some of the key learnings I got out of this process is to be flexible, right? So there's a lot you can learn from teams, and as you go through these processes, you learn that some aspects are more important than the others. So be very flexible on what is uh, a good component of the score. Be flexible to also be able to change the score once you've already released it, right? It doesn't mean to say that once you have a score, it's set in stone. One of the things, if you're going to relentlessly pursue continuous improvement, one of the things you have to do is improve the components that are going to contribute to your success. So as time goes by, you want to look at the score and say, hey, I wanted this to be a good indication of good availability. Is it really doing that? Are these components, like having a high score, does it correlate to high availability? Or is it the other way around? Do I still have high availability even though I have a small score? Then maybe that's telling you a story that those components are probably not the right components. So you want to be able to change it. Similarly, you might come up with a new operational mechanism or a tool that your team introduces. You want to be able to have room to include those tools within your score as well as time goes by. Get feedback. That was one of those very important things. Just like I said, getting teams, democratizing this, getting teams to tell us, hey, this is what is going to work for us and this is what isn't, is also very, very important. Because otherwise it defeats the purpose of having a score, right? Like for all the purposes that I talked about earlier, for it to be a mechanism that teams use, for it to provide actionable insights, its users are key. And if you go off and develop a score like this in a silo, it gets very difficult to sort of make that connection. Finally, during this communication, words and phrases matter. So if you go in and say, hey, we're going to evaluate a score, we're going to hold you up to this, and this is going to be your goal, teams are, they already have a lot going on, but with that complexity that I showed you earlier, the last thing they want is another evaluation mechanism. So treat these scores as proxies, right? Talk about it in truly what it is. This score is really a proxy to talk about operational health or to figure out the operational health of a team. It's meant for the teams to use, for them to be able to prioritize what they should and should not be working on. Now, with all of that said, I know you were already bought into the concept of a score, so I don't think I'm going to see a whole lot of surprises here. But I'd like to know if you do find a score like this useful for you, and if you can see this being a useful tool in your toolkit to achieve operational excellence. With that said, I'd like to see the poll results, and we can conclude and move on to Q&A in a bit. Let's take a look at the results. Arko, if you have any.
Yeah, it's 83 for the people are saying yes, and 16% are saying no.
Okay, good to know. All right, that's good to know. With that, on that high note, I'd like to go and take a look at if we have any questions, and I
Yeah,
can answer them live.
I'm sharing them on the screen itself, so you can take this is the
All
first
right.
question.
All right. So do teams become competitive about resilience scores, or do these scores really vary based on complexity of teams? Very good question. And yes, it totally depends on the complexity of teams. And so far, at least, we haven't come across any at least unhealthy competition. The competitiveness comes in that when teams look at these scores and they see some teams better than the others, they actually go learn as to what made X team that had a high score get to that score and see if they can borrow some of the best practices. And as far as their goals on what they want to be taking for a score, that really depends on the complexity of teams. Some teams like to have a higher score depending on where they are at on their life cycle, and some teams are okay with just having a delta change.
Just a
What was the
second question.
response from teams when it was, yep, when it was introduced? Is the scoring automated or pretty manual process? Both great questions. So since we worked with teams right from the get-go, when it was first introduced, it wasn't a whole lot of pushback. Having said that, teams did have a lot of very good questions, like right from leaders to teams, as to what the score means for them, and how we could um, implement it and use it, right? Um, One of the definite concerns was, hey, what if I hit a score and then you go and add a new component? What does that do? So there's a few things that we have worked out for that. We try to not move the goalposts too many times. And if we did, we better have a good reason for why. Um, and then if teams, for some teams that did have any inhibitions, we had several sort of ask me anything type sessions or office hours that we took the time to answer a lot of the questions one on one to help them ease into it. And then they would go back and look at it. And after having all of their questions answered, very open to it. Now, is the scoring automated? It is automated. Unfortunately, I couldn't show you the whole tool, but it is fully automated. So we use our backend processes where we have other tools that have this data that feed into that talk about the status of each one of those components. So we were able to automate it. There were a couple of items that we could not automate, which we needed like folks to give answers for. So as a part of the tool, what we did was we provided the notion of an override button. So for things that we didn't automate, we basically took off points, but then teams could come and request an override if they do satisfy that criteria. Are there any implicit, explicit weightage? Yes, that's a very good question, and there is. So, in the for the deployment safety, it's one of those most very important aspects of our um, our scoring. So um, over 45% of the score is for deployment has been allocated for deployment safety. For the operational readiness review, we are somewhere between 20-25%, and then 15 each for the other two. And even within the deployment safety criteria, we have weights. So depending on whether or not the particular safety criteria has um, more or less impact, we have different weightages as well. Next question. Is there a leaderboard or a scoreboard that shows every team score to each other and what goes into each score? Yes. So the radar chart that I showed you, I had to obviously take out the team names or service names, but uh, that radar chart itself had the scores of 3 teams, and that's visible across the board. Like anyone logging into the tool should be able to see it, right? So there's no leaderboard, so we're not ranking anybody. We definitely don't want this to be a report card, right? But then we do show the team score, so anybody can go and look at any team, either based on who the manager is or the service name, and look at the score. It's out there. And as you filter on, you get either just that team score or an average score. And we also in the tool have individual components, and we show where teams have lost the score. So these are the XYZ items where you lost your score, so go fix this type of thing. How do you make these insights actionable? So that's exactly by showing the teams sort of where they are lacking. So it's not just the radar chart. So if I would have showed you the entire tool, you would have seen that it's the radar chart followed by the actual pieces where the components are lacking, right? So, and the way we make it actionable is by 2 means. One is teams themselves can take goals if they want. They can say, hey, I want to make my score go from 83.46 that I see today to 91 point something, or it's enough for me if I go to 88, right? So that promotes action when they take goals. And the other way we promote action is by showing explicitly where the goals are, where the points are lost. And the way our tool is built is also that when you try to dive deep into any aspect of the score that you've lost points on, you take into the exact configuration that shows them what's going on. So, and then you also link to wiki pages to show where you can, how you can go and reconfigure your system to gain those points. So those are the 2 mechanisms we use for actionable insights. Any other questions, Arko or Vedant?
Yeah, so I think we have already answered now all the questions. So
Okay.
yeah, thanks Sudeepa. This was a very great session. I hope like everyone has learned a lot from it. Um, in case if we have any other questions, there is a Slack that we have created in the Slack. There's a thread that we have created in the Slack, so everyone can put up their questions there as well, and we will take those questions from there. And yeah, so thanks everyone for joining, and there are still some other sessions proceeding further. Please join there as well. So yeah, thank you everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chaos Carnival, and thank you for all the lovely questions as well.